Escape with us as we drive off to meet our special guest on what is our first episode of From the Horsebox. I'm Claire.
And I'm Kate. And we will be chatting to many interesting characters along the road with a shared interest in the countryside and its wildlife. Today we give a warm welcome to Charlie Barnett, who has managed many prestigious racing venues, including Aintree and Ascot.
Having read some podcast tips, I think the best one was to make sure you have a drink to hand to help the vocal cords. So I've chosen some champagne to celebrate our first episode.
I'm in the driving seat with no drink. This is our first recording in the Horsebox, all within government guidelines. So Charlie, tell us what's in your glass.
Well, in the winter I quite like whiskey and soda. In the summer I go for a gin and tonic, please.
Good choice.
The views from your house are stunning. This countryside must give you enormous pleasure.
Well, it surely does. I've been very lucky to live in the countryside all my life, really, apart from a few years when I was in London. And I always used to go out home to Oxfordshire, where we lived for every weekend if I possibly could. It really is very nice to live in the countryside.
Can you tell us what wild flora and fauna you see around your woods and garden?
Well, we're very lucky because we've lots of stuff to see there, really. Obviously, in the woods, there's all the wild animals you would expect. Badgers, foxes, rabbits, hares. I'm always pleased to see lots of hares. And we're very lucky with the birds because you get woodland birds as well as garden birds. So we see some interesting things, like I've seen a tree creeper quite regularly there, nuthatches, all types of woodpeckers and so on. So it's a very, very nice place to be.
You've got a lot of traditional woodland, haven't you? Now, horses have always been a part of your life. What other things do you enjoy doing in the countryside?
Well, I've always enjoyed just actually being in the countryside, but I've done shooting, obviously, and a bit of fishing as well. And fishing's a lovely thing to do, and you want to concentrate hard on something, and you haven't got to worry about the world.
You went to Eton. Do you keep up with many friends from school?
And oddly enough, Kate, most of my closest friends now are friends from school or from home when I was growing up. And although I've got quite a good few friends from university, I've kept up more really with my mates from school.
You then read law at Oxford. Was this very full on? And how did you balance the academic and leisure time?
Well, it's extremely full on. Luckily, had sufficient time to play polo 3 days a week in the summer. And I was Master of the Drag Cone, so that was 2 days a week, and I went hunting the third day. So it was only in my last year I got rather panicky about my degree and had to work jolly hard. But luckily I did get my degree.
Yes, it sounds very full on.
Did you do a lot of competing and race riding?
Well, I had point-to-pointers, so we were riding a point-to-points at that time, as well as playing polo. And also polo is pretty competitive. And the Oxford and Cambridge MAC was a big deal for us. And so I got a half blue for polo. I got a half blue for point-to-pointing, ridiculous as it was an Oxford versus Cambridge steeplechase. And finally I got a half blue for clay pigeon shooting. So it was really good fun.
Now, you worked at a firm of solicitors, Linklaters, for 2 years. Has your legal knowledge been useful at all?
Yeah, very useful. I think you go back to that a lot when almost any job you've been doing, all the jobs I've been doing, I find myself constantly thinking about things which might have a legal ramification, and it's been very helpful.
And then together with Georgina and your young family, you moved to Malpas to work for the Bibby line. Was life in Cheshire very different to life in the south of England?
Yes, it was. We knew nobody really here at all when we came. We had two people we knew, and otherwise we just had Flora as a tiny baby. So when you have a little baby, you kind of meet lots of people, don't you, as you go round and about. So it was great fun, and we lived over at Eton by Tarpley in a rented house, and then bought the Roundhouse at an auction, which was pretty derelict farmhouse out by Malpas, and moved there and did the work and lived there for 16, 18 years before we moved over here to Rose Hill.
You've always enjoyed your hunting with the Winstay. What was it like for the Barnett family getting so many of you ready for hunting?
It was busy, to say the very least, as I'm sure you know. But it was tremendous fun, really. And those sort of family days with everybody in the horsebox and the ponies and struggling getting cleaned beforehand and afterwards. It was really, really good fun. It was most enjoyable time, really.
It is very much a family occasion, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Have you hunted with any other packs?
Well, I grew up in Oxfordshire, as I said, and so I hunted with the Bicester there from one of my first memories, really, when I was, I suppose, 8 till we moved up here. And we had a lot of fun there. And of course, I was master of the Oxford Drag, so we hunted the drag, which was, really just a good gallop around the countryside, to be honest.
I remember some years ago an event called the Midnight Steeplechase. Can you tell us how this idea came about?
Well, I think Georgina and I were talking about how we could make some money for the hunt one way or another. And she said they'd had a midnight steeplechase up in Scotland where she came from. And it seemed like a great idea to me. And it was, as you recollect, quite a chaotic and fun occasion, to be honest.
It did go on till about midnight too, I seem to remember.
It did. It was a great party.
You had to have the lights on the fences by the end of the evening.
We did have. We put the cars against the fences, didn't we? I do remember Thomas Greenall being swept off by a branch.
And the finale of the race, what do they have to do for the finale?
They had to jump back into the bed, if you recollect.
In their pyjamas. So tell us about your move from shipping life to sporting life.
It was suggested to me by a headhunter in Manchester that I should consider looking at the job running Haydock Park Racecourse. So, because we'd had a certain affinity with racing and horses, I thought it was an interesting one to have a look at. So I went along there and was given the job to run Haydock in 1983, was it, or 4? 84 perhaps. And it was it was a different sort of business entirely, really, because while they're both service industries, you're dealing with a lot of customers on a racecourse, which is much more than you do on the shipping world. And it was tremendous fun actually going there, and that was the beginning really of quite a nice career I've had in racing.
Whilst working at Haydock, Peter Daresbury asked you to help out at Aintree in 1993, which was the year of the Void race. Luckily it was not you in the hot seat. Tell us what happened.
The December before that, John Parrott, who was running Aintree, had a heart attack actually hunting with the Winster and died. So Peter asked us to go over and give him a hand for that year's Grand National when I was still at Haydock at the time. So I was brought in as the sort of manager to pull the show together. So I was standing at the start actually, and there was a bit of a fracas going on before the first fence. There was a demonstration. It was blowing quite a strong wind from the east, so everything was blowing into the horses. And it was, a full start. It was absolutely extraordinary. No one really quite knew what was going on. Some of the jockeys were aware of what had happened, others weren't. And when they came around for the second circuit, they tried to stop them because then you could theoretically restart the race. But the ones in front kept on going, and therefore the race was obviously going to be void. And I think Peter O'Sullivan, commentator, realised that was the case as well. So it was a void race, and then the public wanted to know what the devil was going to go on, whether their bets were void, could they get their money back from the bookmakers, all that sort of stuff. And it was quite a difficult job to unwind at the end of it all, but there was no drama really. Nobody was killed, nobody was injured, and it was one of those events that were part of the Grand National's rich tapestry.
Yes. Now, on normal race days, Claire has a vision of you celebrating with owners in champagne bars. Well, I think of you dashing around doing the nitty-gritty. Who is the closest?
Well, Kate, you are spot on. You are absolutely spot on. I always made it a rule never to have a drink on a race day, because otherwise you're going around to see lots of people all the time, so everything's all right in their corporate hospitality boxes or at their table. And they said, come on, have a drink. And I said, well, I don't want to have one because I'd have 21. So I never had a drink till after everybody had gone at the end of racing. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, Claire.
Well, you were invited to all these fabulous parties, but you just couldn't go then.
Well, I just went in to see that they were happy rather than they were having a good day and the food was up to scratch or whatever.
It's just the excitement, isn't it, of the race day that we see as viewers.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, that's what it should be like, really, shouldn't it?
Yes.
People who are watching on television or there on a race day should enjoy the bits of it rather than worrying about the things.
Charlie was there organising it, meanwhile.
Yeah, well, worrying about whether the loos are blocked or something, which is what I was worrying about.
And what about the incredible sights at Aintree? Does anything in particular stand out?
Well, lots of things stand out, Kate, as you can probably imagine. We started Ladies' Day, which was a tremendous triumph, really. And I can remember the girl who was in charge of our sales and marketing at the time. I said to her one day, how are the sales going for the meeting? And she said, they're going like mad on Ladies' Day. I said, what's Ladies' Day? She said, well, they all call Friday Ladies' Day, all the local guys. I said, right, we're on. We're calling it Ladies' Day now, from now on. And it was really a tremendous success it's been. And we had a lot of fun with that, with the Liverpool girls who really enjoyed the day, dressed up, wonderful.
You oversaw a lot of modernisation at Aintree. How difficult is it to preserve tradition as well as making changes that have to happen. And can you tell us a bit about progressing to sharing Aintree with overseas, Hong Kong and China?
Well, I think you're right. It's very important to keep the sort of tradition there. And one of the big concerns we had when we moved the weighing room was getting rid of the old unsaddling enclosure and weighing room. But it always struck me that there were, the world's most famous steeplechase, probably the most important race in the world. When the winner comes in, about 500 people could see it. And it was, while there was a big crowd, it was a good atmosphere. If you're there, for the public, they couldn't really see it. So I thought if we could try and change it round a bit when we were doing the main developments. And I think actually it does work quite well now. And I like the idea of the horses coming underneath the grandstands to come into the unsaddling enclosure, and more people can see it now than could in the old days. And obviously it was important. Martel was sponsoring the Grand National then, and it was important for us to see what they wanted to do in marketing terms for their product. And the Far East was a very important market for cognac. And so Grand National was beamed live into Hong Kong Jockey Club, I think in 1992 for the first year. And obviously it happened in 1993 as well and thereafter. And we went to China to see if we could get it shown on Central China Television, which is what we achieved. It was pretty important for them and therefore for us too. So it increased the worldwide audience dramatically by some hundreds of million.
So it's very important to make changes when you have to.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yes. Now, we all remember the 1997 bomb threat on the Grand National Day and your statement on the BBC. How did you manage to remain so calm and control your feelings?
I don't know. I don't know.
Because I do remember it vividly.
It was a day or 2 or 3 days to remember, really. I was up actually watching the race before the Grand National in the steward's box, which was the main control box for the racecourse, with Ian Renton, who was clerk of the course, and the telephone rang. It was a police control room, which was just over by the Grand National start, and he said, "We've had a coded bomb threat, and we're just verifying with the military in London." And so I went back to my office, which was below the grandstands, and got the directors there at the same time. And when we got there, they told us the bomb threat was valid and that we had to evacuate the racecourse. So we started the process of evacuating the racecourse. And I remember walking down from the box to my office at the racecourse and saying to myself, "Oh, this can't be happening to us, can it, surely?" Anyway, after those initial feelings, you sort of start thinking about how we're going to manage the whole process. And it was a very, very big operation, really, for the police and for our team. It never ceased to amaze me how our team of security staff managed to get people out of the racecourse. Because by that time, obviously, we'd had a few drinks. You're talking about 70,000 people. And amazingly, within about an hour and a half, they got most people out of the grandstands and onto the roads outside the racecourse.
So what time did the actual call come in?
The call
way
came
before
in.
the National?
Yes, it did, yeah. So the race would probably be at 3:45 then, so I should think the race before the Grand National was 3 o'clock. I guess the calls would have been 2 o'clock, 2:15, something like that. So I was then taken to meet the police hierarchy. I can give us your sort of control. The chap who's on site managing the police is called the Silver Commander, and his boss is the Gold Commander who's not on site. And he had to be brought to the racecourse area, and we had a procedure whereby we all met actually off-site at another location. So I was taken off there by the police to meet him to decide what we were going to try and do next. At the same time, the public were all being pushed out onto the roads. And eventually, after a bit of shilly-shallying, we were taken down to police headquarters in the centre of Liverpool, where there was a meeting taking place, which obviously we were part of. That was, Peter Darsbury was with me, our marketing and PR people, the sponsors were there, and all the police and the local authority people were there, because what they were concerned about was what were they going to do with 70,000 people on the streets of Liverpool? How were they going to get home? And so they had to organise accommodation for these people and open up schools and gymnasiums and everything else like that. But as it happened, at the end of the day, there were only about 4,000 people. They had to find accommodation for everybody else, more or less found their way home by hook or by crook. Almost everybody's got a good story to say about.
Yes, there are incredible hospitality
Were you
stories.
there or not?
No, but there are incredible stories from the people of Liverpool who offered hospitality. Do you remember?
Oh yes, lots of that. And I if you people like Marcus Armitage, the journalist, for example, who I know well, he evacuated out through the Horsebox Park in into Melling Road, and sort of knocked on the door of a chap there to see if he could write his script and everything in there. And those people are great friends of his now. He always goes to see them and has cups of tea with them now. And I think that happened quite a lot. And in a way, I sort of had in my mind that after 1997, that people sort of realised that, first of all, people were really nice and really good fun, and also entertaining and very, very hospitable, and that the race was there. It was in Liverpool rather than up at Aintree. I mean, all part of Liverpool, of course. So it was amazing.
It sort of brought everybody together, really.
I think it did. It did bring everybody together, actually. It was a very nice atmosphere after the event, anyway.
Still the biggest ever evacuation in peacetime.
So I understand. Yes, it was. I mean, it was quite extraordinary, really. And then what bothered me when I was dragged away by the police, obviously I had to go, was that everybody was out on the street not knowing what was happening. We had no means of communicating because all the loudspeakers faced into the racecourse, not onto the streets. And the only way they could get any information was really by listening to local radio, which I think a few people did. And then the whole process of going home sort of started.
You mentioned that the cars were impounded in the middle of the racecourse and there were dogs and things and people needed to get to their dogs. Have you got any story about
I think
rescuing?
No vehicles were allowed to leave the racecourse at all, although one or two managed to creep away. The police didn't really want us to let the horseboxes go, but we managed to persuade them that they should go. The horses and horseboxes should leave. The racecourse couldn't want to deal with them, really. And I think one or two people did have dogs in cars. And I think the police were pretty sensible about that and sort of organised, allow them to leave and so on. And then, of course, when they weren't very keen to run the race on the following Monday, which is when we wanted to run it. And they were persuaded to do so, I think, by sort of political pressure to do so because it was quite important. It was an IRA-coded bomb threat, and it was in the middle of a campaign where bombs had actually gone off at a cruise station and on the M6. And so they were concerned not to allow it to be some kind of a sort of propaganda coup, I suppose, for the IRA.
An amazing story of cooperation between you and all the racegoers and the police then.
Yes.
Looking back on it, sort of on a scale of 1 to 10, what was your heart rate, do you think?
To start with, it was probably very high indeed, but I suspect that, as soon as you get into planning mode, you just concentrate on what you're doing. And, it's some entertaining moment during that whole 48-hour, 3-day period, well, lots of them really. And the main thing was to be able to get the race off on the Monday, 5 o'clock. We had discussions with the BBC. What's the best time to run it for you to get biggest viewing audience? And they had to be just before the 6 o'clock news in those days. So I think it was 5 o'clock or 5:15 we ran it, which was getting perilously dark, really. But it was fine, really, as it happened in the end.
And just remind us who won the...
Lord Galeen.
It was a local story,
Yes, trained by Steve Brookshaw down the road, yeah. Tony Dobbin. There's a great photograph of Tony Dobbin on the Saturday leaving the racecourse, like all the jockeys did in their racing gear. So he stood by a bus stop, his racing kit, colours and everything else like that. And the jockeys all went to the centre of Liverpool because they couldn't get their clothes out of the weighing room. They were all going on the train. You can imagine the sort of
Brilliant.
Some Liverpool wag saying, "You're just going home from work, mate."
After managing the crisis so well at Aintree, it was no wonder that you were asked to help them out at Ascot with their new stand. How did you make such a success of it?
Well, I don't know whether it was surprising or not. It was nice of them to ask me anyway, Claire, and it was very nice to go to Ascot.
So you had to show them how to use the stand and make it work?
Well, in a way, that's exactly what happened. Quite a lot of small alterations were made to the grandstand, and I'm sure they're doing them every year now too, just to make it more sort of, well, some of it was a bit cosy, some of it to make it so you could find your way about more easily, how the division between the different enclosures worked. So it was quite an interesting thing to do. And, we had a very good team of people.
Now, were the Ascot racegoers very different to those in the northwest?
Yeah, very much so, yeah. And I think half the thing of running a racecourse is to understand who the customers are. And certainly, even Aintree, the crowd was different to those at Haydock. You've got different categories of closures and so on at Ascot. And there were more people who came, for example, to the Grand National, who were keen on racing than we would get at Ascot. particularly Royal Ascot, where half of it's pageantry and fashion and the other half's wonderful racing. So it is quite different. And it's a question of trying to understand what those sort of crowds might want.
So on the racecourse, you must be a connoisseur of picnics. What is in your ultimate picnic hamper?
Well, I've never had much of a picnic, to be perfectly honest, Kate.
No, but if you could choose, imagine you're on that idyllic.
Well, we did a deal with Fortnum and Mason, so they could deliver picnics to people in the main Royal Enclosure car parks, and I think their picnic hampers look pretty amazing, really. What would I really like in there? Well, I'm sure you'd have a smoked salmon sandwich, wouldn't you? And Scotch
I think you should try Anson and Curtis nowadays, too. A local.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. I have seen Caroline there providing delicious food to other punters.
I did see a cartoon the other day about a butler next to a picnic. There weren't really butlers, were there?
Do you know there were?
Really?
It was amazing. And there were times when you get catering vans coming in to bring the picnic, which we didn't really like or allow. It was not supposed to be commercial. But you certainly saw butlers, and you'd see people laying a table out in the weather, with the conditions and everything else like that. It was rather posh and ridiculous, really.
Wonderful. Now, after Ascot, you were asked to work on eventing safety for the FEI. What was the best thing to come out of all your research?
I think the best thing was really that it made the people look carefully at how they organised these collapsible fences, because the statistics showed when I was looking at it there were more fallers at those fences than at ordinary fences, and I think they sort of pushed it more forward to the whole way the courses were built. And maybe, I don't know whether there are less fallers or not now, to be honest. I haven't really seen their statistics, but that was the most interesting thing, I thought.
Georgina has a share in a very smart 4-star horse. Do you enjoy watching him compete?
Well, we've been a couple of times. We went up to Blair Castle and watched it up there, which was great fun. It's nice to go, but you need to be able to walk about. In COVID times, it must be very difficult if you've got eventing well.
So let's go back to the hunting. There's more time for it now. And we often see you on retired racehorses. Do you enjoy the challenge of retraining them?
Well, I do, actually, yes. And I do like riding thoroughbreds, and very often they come from the racing field. And I've found that if there's a good racehorse, it'll almost certainly turn into a good hunter. So I've been lucky enough to have 2 really good racehorses, one called Agawada Gold and the other one called Chives, and they've both turned into pretty good hunters, really.
So you're retraining them as opposed to them retraining you?
More likely to be the latter, Kate. More likely to be the latter.
We're in a very smart horse box today, but you must have seen some very smart horse boxes in eventing and racing. Would you like to tell us about your own trusty hunting box? And do you enjoy driving it?
I don't mind driving. I don't want to go too far in it, really. And it is functional. It doesn't have accommodation or cups of coffee or anything like that. And I enjoy driving it because I'm going to somewhere where I'm going to enjoy myself, I hope.
Do all the family drive it?
No, just Georgina and I.
The backdrops to racing and eventing are always beautiful places. We all know the environment needs a lot of managing to be kept to this standard. How important has this been in your experience?
I think it's really important. I think when people come to a racecourse, they want to see a nice environment. And I've been lucky enough to the racecourse I've worked on generally are like that. So I worked at Cartmel, which is completely beautiful up in the lakes. Sitting outside there and on non-race day, it's just magical. I mean, Aintree is extraordinary because it's effectively in the middle of the town, but it is very interesting, very pretty, good wildlife there too. You've got a lot of interesting sort of waders and seabirds because it's very close to the Mersey estuary there. And Ascot, of course, is beautiful. It's a heathland in the middle and protected in the centre. It's very nice.
So the racecourses play a big part in environmental
They definitely
protection.
do, and they do more of it than one would imagine.
Now the next section we call quickfire questions.
Flat or jump?
Jump.
What chore do you hate doing?
Mucking out.
If you won £1 million, what would you buy?
I think I'd pay off my debts.
What's the best compliment you've ever received?
Probably something along the lines of, you've set the bar very high for your racecourse.
If you could be a fictional character, who would you be?
Well, that's very tricky. I'm not sure I'd want to be James Bond. Perhaps Q.
So personal chef or personal trainer?
Well, I've got a personal chef at home anyway, so perhaps personal trainer.
What book are you currently reading?
Oh, I'm reading a rather interesting book about trees. I can't remember what it's called, but it explains how trees can communicate with one another.
Which two famous sports people would you like to have to dinner?
Tricky. I sort of thought someone like Bobby Charlton, who's been a bit of a hero of mine, will be one. Ian Botham would be quite entertaining.
Absolutely. Life in lockdown must have been a great contrast to your busy racing life. How do you feel you have coped?
Well, haven't we been lucky, really? So I've been able to be at home in the countryside and do the things I've been able to do all the time.
That's very good to hear. Finally, we ask all our guests if they have a motto or a joke which has kept them going through the pandemic.
Well,
we all know what it's going to be, Charlie.
do you?
Yes. You said it when you walked in earlier, actually.
What was that?
Don't look.
Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Thank you. Kate, that's very kind of you to remember that.
We feel enormously grateful to you for joining our journey today on From the Horsebox, and have loved everything you have shared with us. Even though you were always too busy to join in on the celebrations on race day, all your stories were winners today.
Yes, we hit the jackpot with Charlie. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us. It's now late March with the Grand National just around the corner. In such tricky times, we will appreciate the race more than ever. If you have enjoyed From the Horsebox, please press the subscribe button and recommend us to your friends and family.
We will look forward to the first of the month, when it could be you in the driving seat.